Hybrid cloud has revolutionized the way businesses operate in the modern world. Companies are in constant need of professionals who can manage and maintain their cloud infrastructure. A report recently came out that by the end of the year, more than 90% of enterprises will have a hybrid cloud infrastructure in place. This means a huge demand for professionals who can design, implement, and manage these hybrid cloud environments. Our guests today are some of the best people to give advice on the hybrid cloud, as they are the hosts of the Cables to Cloud podcast. So without any further ado, let's roll to today's podcast. Welcome to the show, you guys. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. And do you mind kind of each taking a minute and telling us a bit about your background and how you got into the industry? Alex, let's start with you.
All right. Get off mute here. So I was actually active duty military for about 10 years. What's funny is I actually started as a cook and eventually just changed my job at one point to get into IT. And they call it a LAN administrator is the position, but it's really help desk. You don't do anything with networking basically. So, eventually after years of that, I got out. I moved to the DC area when I got out because I had a security clearance. And if you have a security clearance and Army experience and like a security plus, it's like a guaranteed job ticket in the DC area. So, that was the first place that responded. I had like a couple places lined up that I was looking to move to, but that was the one that I was getting all the job offers. So moved out there, did contracting for about 5 years, all, various networking jobs. I worked on the NMCI contract, which Tim also was on, and I'm sure we can talk about that. Just jumped around to a bunch. I basically did one a year for like the 5 years that I lived there, until I just recently, about a year and a half ago, started working for Presidio. It's just, they're a big VAR, but I actually work for the federal side, not for their commercial side, which is kind of like its own company. But they still report to each other. Presidio is actually owned by a foreign entity, so they're not allowed to do government work. So they have to they had this spin-off, and that's where I work for currently. And I'm just doing, my background's really a lot of like data center networking. So I've done lots and lots and lots of ACI, like Cisco ACI work. And now I just do lots of data center and cloud. That's for all the federal and government customers that we have.
Very nice. Well, welcome to the show. Chris, do you mind taking a few minutes and kind of introducing yourself?
Actually, Tim, how about you go next? I'll give this jackhammer guy another few minutes to see if he'll finish up.
Yeah, hopefully that jackhammer. Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay. So let's see. I got my start not quite 15 years ago now in networking, a little before that, or a little after that. I started on the NMCI, actually, in the Norfolk Network Operations Center there. That was my first networking job right after I got my CCNA. And, from there I went to a global enterprise, got to go around the world, do some data center installs and stuff like that. And what was cool about enterprise, of course, is because it wasn't too big of an enterprise where you got all these siloed teams, I ended up kind of owning a lot of the stuff. So not owning, but like working on a lot of the stuff. So security, voice, data center, route switch, like all of it. And, like I said, I got to go around the world, do some installs. That was a lot of fun. From there, I went to Cisco. I worked at Cisco for about 6 years. First year as a contractor, and then a blue badge. I got to do all sorts of cool stuff at Cisco. Became a SD-WAN, expert there. And a little over a year ago, I transitioned to cloud networking. I work for Aviatrix, which is a cloud networking vendor.
Very, very awesome. Chris, how's that jackhammer going?
Not much better, but I can give it a shot anyway. So, I got into the industry probably about, somewhere between 10, 13 years ago, something like that. Kind of just got my start working at a cable company doing tech support, helping people program their TV remotes and troubleshooting their home internet and things like that. And then, eventually I got my CCNA. and moved to their network operations center and worked on their, kind of more big commercial Metro Ethernet customers and things like that. Moved to a managed unified communications and MPLS provider, and that's kind of like where I really found my passion for networking. That's when it really like clicked in my brain. I remember I learned MPLS, and like it was like I just plugged into the matrix, man. It really just like sent me over. I was like, this is awesome. So then eventually I actually met Tim shortly after that when I was studying for my CCIE. We were CCIE buddies for a while, studied together, took the lab more times than Tim, but we eventually got there in the end. And then I actually transitioned to a VAR as well. I worked at WWT, Worldwide Technology, and also became an SD-WAN architect there, and I actually worked with Tim again a little bit there. And now I also work at Aviatrix, a cloud networking and security vendor. I got Tim to come join us about a year ago now, and so yeah, we're coworkers, and it's a lovely thing.
Very nice. So diving right on in, you guys have a brand new podcast, Cables to Cloud, and it is focused on hybrid networking. Which is, businesses are finding that some workloads run better in the cloud while other workloads are best left on-prem. Let's dive into that a bit more and why this is the case and some of the challenges some of the networking engineers are facing in this hybrid environment.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. So yeah, I think one of the biggest pieces that's tough about transitioning from networking on-prem to networking in the cloud is not so much on-prem. I feel like it's very just, hey, I need to let point A talk to point B. We need to facilitate that communication. In the cloud, it gets more complex with that just because of the way the applications are built. One of the very fundamental pieces to working or putting your apps in the cloud is also decoupling your apps, right? So you have your web tier where that's the front end that's facing your end users. You have your database tier. You might even have additional tiers beyond that. So all of that, every one of those components has required networking, and you might need load balancers kind of sandwiched in there as well. So that I think that's one of the pieces that really you have to learn as a network engineer that's moving to the cloud is how you work with these distributed and decoupled applications, and it can really take a different change in mindset to be able to look at that way.
Awesome.
Yeah, just to add to that, the other thing that I would say, for people looking to move to the cloud from on-prem or maybe not even moving to the cloud, I like to say that there's plenty of people out there that are network engineers. They need to know something about the cloud. They need to work with the cloud team, but they don't necessarily are looking to transition themselves. Those people, we're trying to help those people as well to be able to speak the language, to be able to have those meaningful conversations with the people the app owners, the cloud teams that are building the architectures in the cloud. And as more crown jewel applications get moved into the cloud, networking becomes more and more important. It was always kind of an afterthought, kind of a, gimme, if you will, from the CSPs up until now. And now that we're moving crown jewels into the cloud, when it makes sense to do so. The networking piece has never been more important. So we're getting that seat at the table, if you will, and we have to be cognizant of that and be able to speak that language.
Yeah, and adding on to that more, whether right or wrong, as some apps go into the cloud and some stay on-prem, businesses just see that the developers can do that, and they're like, oh well, if you can just deploy your app anywhere, networking must be the same everywhere too. So it's easy to just pick it up and just start. It's the same thing. Just start networking in the cloud, and it's not. It's a lot different, and it's just a different approach, a different mindset, different skill set. So to me, that's a really big part of it.
Yeah, and a lot of it is based on what Alex said. Network engineers are like they got that seat at the table, but they got it kind of late. So they're kind of coming in and cleaning up these things that the developers built on their own, because they're not the professionals that are meant to be building networks, right? They just wanted to build an app, so they spun up a VPC, they launched an instance, and they all of a sudden have this fully functioning app, but the networking is just built like trash, right? Because they didn't know exactly what they needed to do. So it's kind of performing a lot of cleanup depending on where the organization is in that migration or transition to cloud as well.
So is it safe to say that this hybrid environment, networking environment, is here to stay and is going to be really kind of the future of network engineering? Gone are the days of just network engineers working on prem environments. They really have to be diverse and be able to deal with the cloud as well.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more obvious, especially right now with things like all these, the AI craze that's going on. There are a lot of workloads that are much better off the cloud. And I know like ChatGPT runs in Azure, right? Like there's a lot of stuff like that, but it's still purpose built inside their cloud.
Yeah.
It's not really like a service that you consume. It's a purpose built thing. So yeah, there are plenty of workloads that will still run on-prem as well that are better for there.
I think it's 100% that the future. I've been saying it on the show now. I think we all have been saying it on the show now for the 3 episodes we have published and several more that we haven't published yet. That the future is going to be hybrid, because once you've kind of introduced this capability to a business and a business has found value in it, that's it, right? That's now part of the infrastructure. That's now part of the plan. Because infrastructure exists to deliver value to the business. Like it's not there just to, we don't build plumbing without some plan for how we're going to run water through it and what value that water is going to bring, so to speak. So the future is definitely hybrid.
Yeah, and like what Tim said, infrastructure is meant to bring value to the business, right? And when you're going to the cloud, there's definitely trade-offs, but you're basically renting all the stuff that you would have paid for in the first place to build your own data center. You're renting that from someone else. So if you do that kind of cost analysis to say like, it's worth it for us to, decommission this many servers that were running this application and put it in cloud. But that doesn't mean every single application needs to move. Maybe you have this giant monolithic thing that the money that it would take for you to refactor that and move it to the cloud, maybe that's not worth it. Maybe that's going to be sunset in the next 5 years, and you're going to spend 5 years trying to get it into the cloud just with all the recoding and refactoring and things like that. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of hybrid scenarios, and no matter what organization you're in, especially if you're a very, very large enterprise, maybe with thousands and thousands of employees, it's not as simple as just pick it up and move it.
No, absolutely. And I think that's kind of a common misconception. I think especially among higher up leadership, they think, oh, we're moving to the cloud, we're going to throw everything into the cloud. And I don't really think, some things just don't work, or it's not practical to throw everything in the cloud. And I think it's a very common misconception, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, I think there's just some things that were just meant to stay on-prem and will perform way better, where there's other things that can be cost savings or give advanced features by moving them to the cloud.
Yeah. So, probably the biggest quote unquote cost savings, there's two cost savings ideas that the cloud brought to us, right? And one of them I think has not been realized, and I'm kind of wondering when that's going to happen, or if that's going to happen in the near, in the foreseeable future. So I'll set that one aside for the second. But the big one, as far as workloads are concerned, is elasticity, right? So in order for it to be valuable, it needs to be elastic, right? The whole value prop there is that you don't need to own 20 servers to run this workload. If you need to scale it up to 20, but it only runs on 2, right? That's the value prop, right? And there are apps that 100% do that, but there are also apps that are 24/7, 70% CPU all the time. Those are never going to be cheaper to put you're basically just, it's the same compute, but you're putting a middleman in the middle of it that you're going to pay extra money to for those workloads. And just very quick, the second thing that, the second value savings that was kind of sold really to CEOs and CIOs and everything was this idea of the economy of scale of the cloud, right? We've all heard it, right? Let AWS buy 40,000 servers and we'll get a really good price on it and we can pass the savings along to you. That one hasn't materialized yet, and I think part of it is because I mean, I don't think anybody would argue that hasn't materialized, right? I think part of it is because the demand is so high that we haven't, like, they're using just about everything, right? So they haven't really been, like, there's been no pressure, no downward pressure to lower, to drop that, you know. And I think, Alex, you and I were talking about this, or maybe it was on Twitter or something, where, like, God forbid, like, what if they did? What if AWS dropped their prices and they had 10,000 more customers show up? Like, nobody would be getting service, right? It'd be a DDoS on the platform or something. So I think we have yet to see that downward pressure.
I'm so glad you called it out, because we haven't really talked much offline about it, but you made that comment on Twitter the other day, and I was like, that is, no one's talking about that. It's perfect, because it's true.
It's the barrier to entry. You know, you got to create that barrier to entry just slightly bigger for those
just to deliver
and stuff.
Well, and what's the spend? Like, it's like 10% of total IT spend is on the cloud right now. There's still so much more. Everyone's freaking out about, oh, the growth is slowing. Okay, but there's still 90% market share out there. Like, there's still so much more. Like Tim said, you can't just lower the prices before everybody even gets in. They're gonna run out of capacity.
Right, and it would be silly to think that they aren't just in the same capacity as every other, large enterprise, oversubscribed to a very probably a very big degree. There's not a big likelihood that that's ever going to materialize in all of the places that they're deployed at once. But yeah, they're definitely not. I mean, we just saw Azure hitting limits with that not too long ago. They were talking about how they've hit capacity limits in specific regions and things like that. So yeah, it's I hope it happens. I want more customers moving this way, but it hasn't totally come to fruition yet.
Yeah, I think AWS I saw something. It was some $1 billion amount that they've invested in additional data centers just in Virginia, just in like US East. Yeah. So I mean, imagine the rest of their footprint.
Now, for the people who are listening to this and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I want to become a hybrid network engineer," where do you recommend them starting? Is the career journey path similar to maybe the network engineer of like 5-10 years ago when hybrid engineering wasn't as much of a thing? Do you have any like recommendations of like important skills they study or topics to study?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. And obviously all three of us come from network engineering backgrounds, so we're probably going to be a little bit biased, but I'm going to try to be unbiased here, because I always have this view of platform teams are becoming a much more common thing because of the cloud. And a platform team is really just like, you have the whole platform that the devs build on top of, right? So you have all these different pieces in there. You have the networking people, you have the sysadmins, you have security, you have DevOps people. So really a good path is to just start with infrastructure in general. Things like learning Linux and simple bash scripting and like simple stuff that is going to help you no matter which field you go in. And then you can branch out when you start to determine like which angle that you like the most, I guess, right? Because there's so many different pieces of infrastructure besides just networking.
Absolutely. One thing I kind of preach on the channel all the time is you have to have that fundamental and that foundational knowledge. Just like you build a house, you have to have a good foundational knowledge of the basics to be able to scale up your career and start learning the more advanced skills. Learning those basic Linux configurations, bash scripting, it just will help set you up for success.
Yeah. And even, sorry, real quick, I'm just taking AWS as an example, because that's the one I've taken, but like the associate exam, it covers all that. Like, it's not like it's networking specific. It covers all the different domains. So like, all the entry level certs are really great as a way to get in there and start figuring out all the different paths you can go down. Like Tim's favorite, SQL administration.
There's an inside joke there. I'm doing a bachelor's in cloud computing in WGU, and I've pushed out all the crap I hate to the end, and so I've been spending weeks doing. I'm done with it now, but I had been spending for a while weeks doing MSQL and like SQL and building databases and stuff. Just putting it all.
I'm sorry. I mean, besides printers, that's about the worst that it gets, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. No, great. That's a good question. And so the question, say hybrid engineer. So Alex took it a direction I hadn't thought about. I immediately went to like, oh, you mean like networking? But no, that's a very good point, right? Like if cloud opens up, not doesn't really open up, but it modifies other infrastructure careers in the same way that it does for networking, right? Sysadmin, DBA, all of that. So I think I would have to qualify the question to be like, would it be like somebody like that's just getting in and doesn't know what they want to do? In which case, 100% what Alex said is right. Try to get a little taste of everything, right? Figure out where your passion might lie or what you kind of are interested in. If you're coming in from, like say you're already a network engineer on-prem and you want to learn cloud networking, I would definitely still probably point you in that direction because that's what I did. You obviously would focus on the cloud networking, but you should learn enough about the architecture and the services of every environment you go into, right? Like you don't have to be an expert DBA to understand like how decoupled SQL apps and stuff need to be able to talk to other tiers, for example, of the application tier or like the web tier and whatnot. So knowing those architectures, at least at a high level, will help you become a better networker in the cloud for sure.
Yeah, I think one very important point is that you can't, as much as you probably want to, especially I see a lot of these kind of get rich quick schemes associated with the cloud. It's like, oh, you earn this cert in 30 to 60 days or whatever, and make $100K. You can't skip the fundamentals, man. Like the fundamentals are like that's prominent through every single solution to the end of time. Like you're not going to be able to skip that. So like if you're getting into, if you're already a network engineer, and you're already wanting to kind of service that role also in the cloud environment, there, just to call out a few key points that you're definitely going to have to know. You're going to have to know TCP, UDP. You have to know how those protocols function, what can break them, etc. BGP, you're going to have a basic understanding of BGP because that's the only routing protocol that's running in the cloud. And I'm very thankful of that. I love BGP, so long live BGP. But I mean, you don't need to know how to tweak every single, knob and things like that. You don't need to know, like very complex BGP architectures, but you got to know how to manipulate it. You got to know local preference. You got to know MED. You got to know things like that, ASPath, prepending and things like that. Load balancing was one for me that I've never really had to deal with on-prem, and that's a very prominent thing in the cloud is load balancing. I apologize. There's a jackhammer across the street, so you might be able to hear a bit of that. But that was one thing. That was one thing that really kind of caught me by surprise was the load balancing. But kind of back to what Alex said, the scripting, the automation piece is also very prevalent there. So if you can have some kind of skill like that, be it Python or even Bash scripting, Linux would help. Terraform is also a great thing, but you can't skip things that are fundamental to the way these things work, right? We just saw a comment the other day where someone was trying to learn Kubernetes and they were like, well, is there an easier way to do it with Terraform? Because I don't feel like learning the Linux commands. It's like, you can't skip that. Like it's as much as it sucks, you got to power through that but that's going to be valuable to you for much longer than you think it is.
Yeah, and it just makes sense. Like as you layer these things on, technologies become so much easier to understand when you learn new ones because you already know. Oh, it's just an extension to this. Right, like Kubernetes is an extension to containers, which is an extension to Linux. Like it's just everything is intertwined. So absolutely, the fundamentals are key in everything.
Absolutely. So I think it's safe to say you all have quite a bit of experience in the cloud. So let me ask you the age-old question that I constantly get asked: how do you pick which cloud provider to specialize in? I see you all laughing. And for those of you listening on the podcast, everyone just started laughing, because I know the answer to this, but I'm asking it because I know there's plenty of people out there that don't.
It's a fair question. I'll go first on this one, because I know everybody's got. I won't say. I think we all probably have a similar answer, but like we'll have our own different. So I
AWS. Okay, next question.
I didn't I didn't pick one, honestly. I started with AWS because AWS was the most prevalent and the biggest footprint and everything. But I'm working on Azure right now. I'm working on my AZ 104. I'll probably work on my AZ 700 after that. My plan is to get the architect associate or similar, like whatever the associate level architect type of cert is in every cloud, and then the networking specialty cert, and I'll stop there. I'm not going to do developer. I'm not going to do security. I'm not going to do database administration or AI or whatever those other ones are. I know I go T-shaped, right? I go really deep on one thing, and then I kind of spread, to the sides for the rest.
Yeah, I'll go next. So, right, of course, we're all going to say learn all of them, right? And I think it's funny because it's not even like, I think we all kind of came into this with the mindset of, well, I'm going to learn all three. It's not like, I also started with AWS, but I had always from the beginning been like, well, I'm going to do AWS and then I'm going to do Azure and then I'm going to do GCP. It was never like, I'm just going to do AWS, get the networking specialty and then stop. I want to know how they all do it, because I think we all agree a lot of things are going to be multi-cloud. It's not going to be just a single one. It's you need to know all of them, and they all do things differently. So you really have to, you got to know all the different steps.
I can't believe we got this far before we mentioned multi-cloud. That's funny. But yeah, I mean, kind of similar answer from me. If we're talking about like how ease of learning, AWS I feel like is the best there, just not necessarily because they have the best solution or because they have the most market share. They also have the most training. They were the first there. Absolutely. So like finding content to learn how to do things in AWS is very easy. They have a lot of great documentation. They even have a lot of great free training on their website. But AWS does things very well. They're also kind of one thing I feel like is a drawback is just death by service names. Like if you do the cloud practitioner cert, you will want to vomit with the amount of like things, just names of services that you have to learn. And you notice there's like 10 different services that do slightly different things, but they could also kind of do the same thing. So it gets very confusing. Azure is a little bit more...
And the serverless version.
Yeah, the serverless stuff, yeah. Azure is a little bit more to the point. GCP is kind of a different beast in itself. I feel like they're very developer focused, which is a kind of a leg up for them. If you're coming at it from that angle where you were more a dev person in the past, GCP is probably going to kind of suit you a little bit better. A lot of those kind of developer centric tools, I've gotten word from people that they run much better in GCP than the solutions that are equal in AWS and Azure. But AWS just has the amount of training, man. It's like you have like there's tons of vendors to learn it from as well. Like you have Adrian Cantrell, who has great AWS courses. What else have I used? Digital Cloud Training. There's A Cloud Guru. They're all pretty much going to cover the big three, aside from Adrian, but he does have Azure courses now through I think a partner of his named Cloudly, which I think Tim is using.
Cloudly, yeah, I am.
But yeah, it's just that's if we're talking about bar of entry, AWS is the easiest.
Now, and you mentioned GCP is definitely more developer focused, and I've dealt with GCP actually the most, and I can agree with that. Would you say it's probably it's the hardest one to kind of learn their special ways and nuances? It's kind of AWS is the easiest, Azure, and then GCP, or what's your guys' take on that?
I think it's different. I think it's very different. Like the global VPC construct is extremely, like there's not an equivalent for Azure and AWS. So I think Google kind of saw what was out there and decided to go their own way, if you will, like for better or for worse, they kind of did their own thing. So I think this is kind of weird, right? So I think if you started with GCP and didn't know anything, you probably would actually be fine, comparatively. Like one of those things where almost like knowing the other two and how they do things actually becomes a little bit of a roadblock to GCP. I think that's my opinion. That's what I've noticed.
Very nice.
Yeah, I think it depends on which angle you're coming at the cloud to. Like, I mean, we've all said it, but just like straight to the point, like if you're a dev and you're looking at it, right, you're going to have a different preference and you're going to pick up a certain cloud easier than others. Like GCP, if you're a dev, like, it's probably going to be the most intuitive. But if you're looking at it from infrastructure, it might be the opposite. It might be AWS or Azure.
Also, I'm sure you can probably make the point that Kubernetes probably runs best in GCP, but I don't necessarily know if that's true. But I'm sure that's something they.
I'm pretty sure.
Absolutely. Now, with COVID, there was a massive shift to the cloud, but it seems like now things have started to kind of go back to normal. There's these systems that were just really thrown super hastily into the cloud, like just. With everyone going remote, there's just things that were just barfed into the cloud, to be honest with you. Do you think those things that were thrown into the cloud are going to be staying up there, or are we going to start seeing a shift back to more on-prem and kind of continue with this hybrid thing we're seeing now?
Somebody else can kick that one off.
I'm waiting on the jackhammer.
All right. Yeah, this is a really interesting question. This is hard because I personally keep up with like a lot of different trends in the industry.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing a lot of right now is companies that are coming out with services that do all this for you that are in the cloud. So it's hard to say if people are going to take their things they lift and shifted into the cloud and bring them back. It's more like they're going to evolve their services. They're either going to use something else that somebody else has stood up in the cloud for them that is, can take better advantage and is just an easier product to use and they don't have to maintain it so much, right? Because that's a lot of what the cloud enables is these services that can do this kind of thing. Of course, there will be people that just bring their stuff back on-prem and do a lot more of the hybrid stuff. But I really think, just to name some stuff so you know what I'm talking about, I think like Prisma Cloud, like F5 has a lot of this distributed cloud thing that they're pushing very recently. There's a lot of like these SASE, that term everyone loves. All these security services in the cloud that people are trying to connect to and that are just a lot of the CIOs really like. So that's a big trend that I see.
And the SASE thing, how brilliant is that, right? Like the SASE thing is hilarious to me. Because I started with. Or not started, but I was working most recently on SD-WAN before I moved to Aviatrix. And following the SASE, journey, like the kind of like cut from whole cloth SASE thing has been just hilarious. Because if you think about it, what is Prisma Cloud? It's a freaking VPC in Amazon with a bunch of Palo Alto firewalls running in it with an IPsec tunnel that connects to it, and you're just offloading all of the security to it. It's bouncing it right back to you, right? Like it's not even, the emperor kind of has no clothes, but like people love it for the reasons that Alex mentioned, which is that, it gets to be somebody else's problem. We can just hand that off. And so I think that's where I think SASE in general really is that embracing of the PaaS architecture, if you will. So I agree completely with what Alex said there. Now, from a lift and shift perspective, I mean, we're already seeing repatriation. There's people did a terrible job lifting and shifting into the cloud, like you said. They barfed it in there, and then the bills come due, and they're full retreat, right? Whoever CEO, CIO,
that first bill comes in and there's just full panic.
And that person, if they didn't already collect their bonus and bounce, they're on their way. They're on their way out pretty quick, right? So because of the poor planning, but some of that poor planning was COVID, like you said. There was a lot of requirement to. How many people? And when I worked at Cisco at the time, how many people were like overnight? They had to like build a fleet of VPNs for all the remote work, stuff like that.
Yeah, I did. I had to do that. Our org was not ready. Yep.
So anyway, but yeah, so I guess to answer your question, yeah, I think we will see some. We've seen it. I say we won't. We'll see. We are seeing it. Repatriation, of course, for stuff that they just like. Okay, well, this was a terrible idea. Let's bring it back. For stuff that shouldn't have probably ever been lifted and shifted, or if it was lifted and shifted, it never got fixed, or it was just poorly planned in the first place. But I do think I agree with Alex. We're going to see maybe a shift more towards the PaaS type services, except where the gap is there, right? Like, some legacy app or something homegrown or whatever, that stuff will probably just live back on-prem.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the same way that, kind of the shift to the cloud because of COVID was reactionary. They were forced to do that, these things in a rushed manner and probably didn't do everything exactly right. Hell, there's been people that have been transitioning to the cloud for years and they're still not doing it right. So it's not like, I feel like the repatriation, which is the process of moving it back on-prem, I also feel like that's like the reporting that people are doing on it is also being a little bit reactive. It's like people are like, I don't know if the repatriators are just being louder than usual, but I feel like anytime an article, like someone's like, this is why we're moving out of the cloud. I see like 10,000 people like, oh my God, look, they never should have done that. This is a scam, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's just like the what is it? The squeaky wheel gets the grease or whatever, so it's just like, I don't know. I feel like cloud has definitely proven itself in providing value, and it's and the agility is a big piece of that. The value isn't so much the cost savings, the lack of ownership of hardware. I think it's more that agility piece, and it's what you can do with cloud more so than where you can kind of reuse your money.
Absolutely. So let's take a few minutes and talk a bit more about your guys' podcast, Cables to Cloud, and what people can expect when they tune in.
Well, I like to bust Chris's balls a lot, as much as possible, in fact, so there's plenty of that in every episode, but it's okay. He does it to me as well.
I was going to say, he says he was going to give you, some cred when you're, late hopping on.
Yeah, Tim, every time we have a meeting, Tim's like, I don't have the invite. I don't have the link. How do I get there? He's like Tim's one of the smartest people I know, but when it comes to joining a meeting, he's like a 4-year-old. He can't find anything. It's crazy.
It's true. I can't push back on it. It's absolutely accurate. So what can you find on the podcast? Chris, credit to Chris. Chris listened to, who was it? It was the Cloudcast, right? It was Cloudcast, right? The Cloudcast was like, hey,
software-defined talk, actually.
Was it software-defined talk? Yeah, sorry, my bad.
It was the host was on that one, though, right? The host of the Cloudcast was on.
Yeah, Brian Gracely from Cloudcast.
You know what? Was on the episode. Let me not tell this. Chris, you take this one. You were the one that started this thing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was really just around starting a podcast in general. There was an episode of Software Defined Talk, which if you haven't listened to that, it's a great podcast. They talk about tech half the time, and the other time is just banter, but it's very good. It was just basically an episode about whether or not you should start a podcast, and they went over some reasons, and I agreed with all of them. They were like, if you're at this point in listening to this and you still like what you hear, then you should do it. So I kind of just tried to think of something cloud focused, because that's something I very much believe in and have a lot of fun with. So I reached out to Tim because Tim and I go way back, and there's also a bigger community called the It's All About the Journey Discord that we're in. It's tied to the Art of Network Engineering, so shout out to them as well. And Alex is always in the cloud channel there, talking shop with people, so I reached out to him as well, and we really kind of just wanted to tell the story of the cloud network engineer and kind of help people maybe do the transition, or at least just understand how things work, and decide for yourself whether or not you do want to do it or you don't want to do it. But also to kind of have these, forecasting conversations as well about what's going to happen, because it's always changing. It's a fun environment to be in. But we kind of felt like there's not a lot out there about cloud networking specifically. It's kind of Tim said that we do have the seat at the table now, which is nice, but at the same time, there's not like a ton of material out there for it. So, if you Google getting into cloud, I feel like half of it's going to be around development, which is perfectly justified. They're what makes the cloud what it is. And I feel like the infrastructure people get a little bit left behind. So we really just wanted to kind of give a vessel to talk about these things, bring people on, do some cloud journey spotlights and hear from people, what did you like about moving? What did you not like? What do you wish you would have known, before you transition, things like that. And that's really what we wanted to showcase.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. I mean, there's like we've talked about, there's so many different paths just on the infrastructure side alone, let alone all the dev stuff that's going on. So could talk forever. Like there's going to be no dearth of episodes to schedule and to talk about and topics to go over. There's so much.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're also going to work on, we're focusing on technology as well. So, on guest spotlights, topics, industry stuff, but also just like cloud networking in general. Like, hey, what's a VPC? What's a virtual network gateway? So on and so forth. So not entirely 100% like educating, like, hey, this is A, B, C, D, E, but really just talking about what it is. And then, of course, okay, you're in the cloud, you're networking, you're working with apps. Like, where do we use these things? How are we going to start building this architecture together? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's going to be plenty of conversations where, we're going to do the same thing we do at, tech conferences when we meet up. We get together, we have fun, and we just talk about the nerdiest thing possible, and just talk about the things we like, the things we don't like, and things like that. So there'll be plenty of banter involved as well. So yeah, that's not going away.
And again, that's the Cables to Cloud podcast. We will definitely link it down in the show notes or down in the description for people to go find. Do you guys have any final advice for people that they're just starting out? Maybe they're on the help desk and they know they want to make the switch in career jobs, but they really just don't know where to start. What advice do you have?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I actually had two friends that I know recently that kind of reached out to me about this. You have to develop an appetite for learning, I think, first of all, because things change so quickly. Things were already a fire hose with just on-prem networking, but the cloud is just like 10 fire hoses at once. I mean, there's just so much going on all the time. And the learning is really helpful because then, like, if you know kind of what you're interested in, you can turn off some of those fire hoses, and then you can only ingest like the things that you want to learn. But you have to put in the work and research things and kind of keep up to date. Like, I'm not saying you have to do 24/7, like be studying and, always talking to everyone on Twitter and LinkedIn and everything, but you really got to embrace that things are going to change constantly, and you got to be ready to move and take up new designs, new architectures, new technologies. Like Chris mentioned earlier, AWS has like 1,000 services. So, and they announce new ones all the time. So you don't have to keep up with every single one of them, but maybe pick a domain and keep up with the announcements that are coming out there and see. It'll tell you a lot about the industry too, about what kind of things are being announced and what they're targeting, like which part of networking they're helping. That's a good thing to see trends and get an idea of where things are going.
You want to take it, Chris? You want me to go?
Sure. Yeah, kind of relating to what Alex just said. I think back to what we said before. One, learn the fundamentals. You can't skip fundamentals. I think that's my number one advice. That you're not going to be able to get by with that. You're not going to pass any kind of core job interview that you need to if you're going to skip the fundamentals, because it's going to show very soon. But I also think just kind of a more open-ended piece of advice is do not be afraid to pivot. Like, no matter where you are in your career, whether it's IT, whether it's not IT, do not be afraid to pivot. I think a lot of people, when I talk to people that are either trying to transition into tech or trying to transition within tech, maybe if you're Maybe if you're doing, voice support or something like that, and you want to get into networking or you want to go to cloud, whatever. I think people really sell themselves short on what kind of their skill set value, what kind of value they can add to what they do. Because, it doesn't matter if you were previously like a chef or you worked in customer service or you did any other job outside of tech. A lot of that kind of teaches you more fundamental, human elements to the job, right? Because I feel like that's something that people struggle with, is the human element sometimes. Like, I worked in customer service for like 5 years, and that has taught me so much about how to talk to angry customers. Like, it keeps providing value to me every single day. So don't be afraid to pivot. Just, really, like Alex said, it's a very ever-changing environment, so you got to kind of dig your heels in and like be ready to withstand the fire hose that comes at you, and just be open to learning as much as you can, and I think you'll really go far.
First thing I would say is you gotta find, find your passion. What I mean by that is, like, you have to be interested. Like, the very first, the biggest advice I can give to anyone who wants to get into tech is be interested in it. Don't chase the paycheck, because there are a lot of industries out there where you can make money, and if you hate what you do, tech is especially punishing to people that hate what they do. Like, so that's the first thing, right? The second thing is learn how to learn. After I took my CCIE, studying for my CCIE was probably the most useful thing I did to learn how to learn something, to create a process, to create a whole like infrastructure in my brain around how to learn things and keep it. But after I was done with my CCIE, I found this amazing course on Coursera. It's free, from Barbara Oakley, and it's called Learning How to Learn, and it goes through the neuroscience of how you should approach just learning things. And it's one of those things where you'll watch the video or like listen to the lecture and you're like, oh my God, my brain does that. I think this is how every time I learn something new, this is exactly what happens. Or every time I try to cram and then I freaking forget it, this is why. Like, it's just like bomb after bomb in your head. So I highly recommend that one if you haven't taken it. Just learn how to learn something. I mean, if you take the course or not, irrelevant, but learn how to learn something. And that'll help you, because tech is a treadmill. Alex mentioned, new services are being announced all the time on AWS. I mean, pick anything in tech, like anything in tech. But networking actually has been somewhat stable for a long time. Even though we've been kind of layering fabric on top of fabric on kind of overlay and all this other stuff on top of it, networking had been pretty stable for the last 30 years or so overall, right? Cloud has come along and blown that dam wide open, and here comes the fire hoses. But my point is that no matter what area of tech you're in, tech is a treadmill. So learning how to learn something first will help you keep your head above the water. And that goes into my last piece of advice is if that doesn't sound like fun to you, tech, maybe you should do something different, because tech is a treadmill and you're going to have to keep up. Right. So I think those are my big suggestions for anyone who's trying to start out in tech.
Insert picture of person tripping on a treadmill and just face planting it, right? Yeah, absolutely. The tech industry is evolving so fast. You, even more than having to enjoy tech, you have to enjoy learning. I think that's going to be the most successful people in this world, is the people who enjoy constantly learning, because that's what you have to do. As soon as you stop, you're falling behind and you're becoming irrelevant. So absolutely. I want to thank you guys a whole bunch for taking the time to come on the channel. And if you guys watching this or listening found this super interesting, I highly recommend checking out their podcast, Cables to Cloud. I will make sure and put a link again in the show notes or in the video description. Again, thank you guys for tuning in. And until next time, keep learning.